What's up, everybody? I'm back doing this live thing. Have not done this live thing in a very long time, but I thought that I would get on here and ramble about something. There's always something to ramble about. Uh, right now, I've been reading. I guess I could talk about the book that I'm reading. It's called Freedom of the Will by Jonathan Edwards. And it's talking about the nature of free will. What does it mean to have free will? And it is in relationship to the long-standing theological debate between divine determinism and free will, which is, I guess you can say, um, categorized in the theological world between two camps, which is Calvinism and Arminianism. And it's been um, a long-standing interest of mine is seeing the relationship between those two concepts, those two ideas, from a biblical standpoint, but also a philosophical and logical standpoint. And it's just a very fascinating conversation slash that has been a philosophical debate in as much as it's been a theological debate. And Jonathan Edwards has a lot to say in regards to the nature of free will. What do people mean by free will? Do we have a will that's free? And he really gets into the logical underpinnings of those ideas, which has been pretty interesting. And one of the Armenian conceptions of God saving the elect, God saving His people, believers. Um, uh, one, yeah, the primary mechanism of which God determines who comes to faith is, why does this keep going on my sorry, is God basically looks through the corridors of time in order to see who would accept the free invitation to come to Christ. And that's known as divine foreknowledge. And that text comes from Romans 8. I think it's verse 29, somewhere around there, or 30, somewhere in that general area. It's definitely Romans 8. But for those that God foreknew, He also predestined. And there's like a kind of chain of effects that's starts with God's foreknowledge, basically. And then Jonathan Edwards, in the chapter that I'm reading, challenges the notion of foreknowledge being a escape from determinism, because logically speaking, um, if God is outside of time and knows or sees the end, the beginning from the end from the beginning, He sees the outcomes, namely whether or not individuals accept the gospel or not, and based upon that foreknowledge, determines to save the person that He sees believing in the corridors of time. He can see that Joe will accept the gospel, and therefore that is the reason that God determines for Joe to um, come to faith, or that God elects him to salvation. The problem with that is that the assumption of divine foreknowledge presupposes determinism. Because if God knows the truth value of whether or not Joe will come to faith or not, is in effect saying that it is determined. Otherwise, God would have known the opposite. And so, for my own like nerding out and trying to avoid, to some degree, just researching the answer and trying to organically think through these thoughts, I kind of came to the conclusion that divine determinism and foreknowledge are concurrent. That it's why do you stop uploading vids about the Enneagram? Because the Enneagram, that's a great question. The Enneagram I find is highly subjective, and I don't think um, clearly delineates people in a distinct way. I think it's kind of vibey, and I just think I have disdain for that kind of way of categorizing a particular personality. Um, and it's more of a, I don't know. The Enneagram, just also the origins of the Enneagram, I just worldview for worldview disagree with. It has a lot of um, anti-Christian propositions that I think are problematic, and people absolutize their type, and I think it's misleading in terms of identity formation. Um, but it's also just not a good determining uh, system. Big Five and MBTI. I think the Big Five um, has some clearly observable um, clearly observable categories of personality that can easily be interacted with and utilized pragmatically. So, for example, it's very clear to see someone who is high in conscientiousness. Like their external behavior demonstrates it. Their house is in order. Their attention to detail is higher than someone who is high in openness, for example. And so you can kind of make predictive. Uh, um, you can kind of make predictive estimates or whatever you want to call it as of how they'll perform in certain situations, namely in a job, in a certain role in their company, that the Big Five can kind of tailor towards a certain kind of person based upon their temperament. And I think that has probably a decent amount of success. I do think that obviously it's extremely behavioral, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Ideally, you would want to have a system that holds motivation and behavior as equally ultimate, and whatever system is capable of relating those in a consistent way without the limitation of the other, I think is the most consistent and useful system to use. But MBTI is also extremely generic. Um, it's not only just extremely trait based, but it's also like the motivations are they're too vague for them to be specific to one type of person or one type. Um, so I find MBTI to be like, do you imagine things a lot? Do you think outside the box? Well, this is a clear indication that you're an intuitor. It's like that's just superficial. Like, but if you had to guess right now, what MBTI type MBTI, wait, what MBTI do you think you are? Because I've noticed mine changes too. By classical MBTI standards, I would be probably between two types. Consistently, I've gotten ESTP, and I would say that probably that's somewhat accurate. But it's MBTI, so I mean, it's highly trait based and based upon vibes. And so, do I vibe like an ESTP? Yeah, probably. Cognitive function wise, yes, there's definitely some things there, but the cognitive functions and the definitions are also very inadequate. So, but I've gotten ENTJ, ESTP, ENTP. From that, I can reliably deduce that I'm most likely not an introvert by MBTI standards for whatever that's worth. So that's kind of how I do purely based on cognitive functions. Like if you had to choose a dominant function, cognitive function, which one do you think would be for you? I haven't been an MBTI for a while, but uh, at the very least, probably some form of PE, either NE or SE. As far as I can remember, the definitions of MBTI SE, it's just kind of like you're engaging with the external world in some fashion, aware of occurrences and happenings around you. Um, You live in the moment. Which again, it's like that's yeah. So maybe that, and I don't mean to sound like condescending. I just don't think MBTI is. It's basically meaningless. Um, but if people use it and they like it, I'm not gonna tell you not to. I mean, do what you do. But yeah. So the trend in MBTI for me has always been between TE and SE, but I haven't even thought about MBTI truly in forever. I mean, it's been a long time. But yeah, I also don't really I don't really I don't really conceptualize personality the way that I used to. Um I use personality like I understand I predominantly use socionics and I've been using that for a decent amount of time, but as a system that I use, a taxonomy that I use, because I think the definitions are consistent internally and externally. I think they make just by the definition of an information element, for example, I think it logically makes sense based upon how it's defined. Um, but I usually talk generally about personality theory to people that don't know personality theory. And if they're inquiring more and need more specifics, then I'll slowly introduce more elements into conversation and try to structurally build their understanding as we progress in the conversation or through time. And it just seems to be more effective because, for example, like the one challenge with socionics is it is very complex and you do have to do a decent amount of research. And, that's just the way that it is. But I would sacrifice for me convenience convenience for truth. Like if this is actually saying something that is consistently true in most circumstances and it's definitionally accurate and it's difficult to understand, I would assume that it would be difficult to understand and that wouldn't be a problem for me personally in the sense of um, I would rather have a system that's harder to grasp but is true rather than one that's easy to grasp and false. I mean, that I just because I'm trying to use it. So if I'm trying to use it and it's too generic, then I'm lumping a whole bunch of people into the same category who cognitively are not very similar, but they hold to superficial. They relate with each other based upon superficial traits that isn't really telling you anything specific about one particular person versus the other. And so I just find that to be uh, it's basically meaningless. I just don't find any value in that. You like the way I think. Thanks. Appreciate it. And again, and this is people get into the tribal debates, and I've participated in them numerous times, so I'm equally guilty. But of what system is most valid, which, at the end of the day, even if you have a robust argument for one system over the other, this is true in any context, whether you're talking about politics or religion or anything that any type of competing ideas in the public arena in any fashion. People, we've seen this politically, can have and face a strong counter argument to their position and still not hold to it, not believe it. And so that doesn't mean that you quit having the conversation, uh, but at the very least, you have a new understanding of the the uh, the kind of environment you're in and the kind of people you're having a dialogue with. And I kind of view those conversations as if someone's not willing to hear me out and vice versa, then it's just not constructive. I don't even see a point. Like it's not possible that they're going to change their mind because they have an emotional attachment to what's being said rather than assessing the validity or invalidity of what I'm saying on its own merit. So to me, there's just no point, So yeah, in terms of how I relate to personality now, it's more forward facing and more general just because most people don't understand what I'm talking about and that's because they don't have the language of the systems I've learned. They could for sure and they may not be interested in it, which is kind of annoying. But, that's why I try to make it That's why I try to figure out to make it relevant to them. And if it's relevant, then there might be intrigue. And if there's intrigue, then there might be a deeper conversation. If there's deeper conversation, then there's an ability to teach them something that they didn't know before, which I find enjoyable. And I also like to receive that too. So, um, you know, I like discussion for the sake of discussion. Um, Specifically when people are are willing to give ground where ground is assumed, and to, if they're in the face of a defeater to their claims, that they're like, okay, yeah, maybe I didn't think about that. You know, do you ever take pre-workout? I used to. I'm also not working out very consistently. I need to get back to it, but I used to take pre-workout. I didn't like the jittery feeling. I thought that I could, if I have coffee. Yeah, I'm a big coffee person. So coffee does, especially if you're cutting. Black coffee is great. One, it curbs your appetite. Obviously, you get caffeine, and it's just pretty solid for you in moderation. So I feel like there's better alternatives. People want to take pre-workout. Great. I don't know the science of pre-workout. I don't know whether or not it's a net positive or not. Um, But I took pre-workout and I felt like my heart was going to explode. And I got that, it's that Brain Gains has a great nootropic blend. Brain Gains, interesting. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I'm always open to trying different stuff. I mean, as long as it doesn't have that there's a certain thing, I forget what it's called. Beta, is it betamine or Badenine or something like that. You might know that. I'm not really sure. There's something in a lot of pre-workouts. Thaline. Uh, yeah. Which? Oh, okay. A bromine, something like that. Yeah, it's something. I thought it was like betamine or something like that. I don't know, but whatever that is, I've heard that's what gives you the kind of scratchy, itchy. And that's also, it's not. It's like, can I have the sharper awareness and the alertness that you would get from pre-workout without the, I feel like I just ran through poison ivy and I can't satisfy the itch kind of thing. Um but yeah, Enneagram, I just don't, it's boring to me now. It's just, yeah, it's, do you think your personality changed a lot in the last few years? Uh Great question. Fundamentally, no. I think I have experienced a lot of circumstantial things that have rounded rounded me in a certain way. I think I'm a little bit more reserved than I used to be. A little bit more in my head. Um, but for the most part, those are superficial uh, changes that I think are normal. And I don't. I think I'm very much consistent in my personality from when I was younger to now. I don't find. Especially, it's different when you're seeing someone over camera and you have some data to appeal to, but it's very limited. But people in my real life would say, yeah, I mean, there's definitely some changes, and some of that makes sense. Been through some weird stuff, whatever, like we all have. Uh, but fundamentally, essential features of my personality, I don't think have really changed that much. Um, Behaviorally, not really. Um, so yeah, I don't think there's been any essential changes to my personality, but people think I'm a little bit more introverted now, which again, once I hear that, of course, because of all the personality nerddom, I start thinking about, yeah, you're using it in the colloquial sense. Um, I don't have to be engaging with people to be an extrovert. That's just a misnomer, and that's what MBTI tells you. And so that's the problem with MBTI. It's like conflating sociability with extroversion, and that I think that's just a conflation. I think there's more ways to relate to the external world other than just relating with people and interacting with people. Um, you can interact with um, literally talking out loud. I think is an extroverted process that you're externalizing your thoughts and making sense of them in the external world, understanding the relationship between objects in the external world, how they the dynamics of external objects, the dynamics of uh, the a relationship between two people, and there's so many ways of extroverting that don't include, am I talking to people or not, or do I like even talking I mean, the logical extroverts, um, and this is kind of a blanket statement, it varies depending on what logical extrovert you're talking about, but some of them can be very content with, um, and again, I'm using a socionics definition of uh, the information elements in the system, but doing research on factual information, understanding how objects work in the real world, that's extroverted logic. um, Considering cost benefit relationships, um, and trying to discern the effectiveness of actions, so on and so forth. Basically, business logic. That doesn't necessarily include being warm and friendly to people. You could do that and be very calculating and dispassionate. Um, and so it's like kind of an extroversion is kind of smuggling in um, ethical and emotive features that I don't think are essential to an extroverted process and or an extroverted element. I just don't find that that's necessary for the necessary. Um, so yes, once you combine certain elements together, then you get more dynamics that include a wider range of things that you are necessarily interacting with people. But yeah, I just think that's a misnomer. But again, people don't know that, and I get what they're trying to say. And there's some truth to what they're saying. I'm not throwing everything out. Generally, yes, introverts keep to themselves and ruminate more and are more subject oriented, to use a Jungian distinction and a philosophical distinction. It's not just Jung. Jung got it from somewhere else. It's just true. There's no new ideas under the sun. Um, and egocentric, yes, that's definitely true to a degree. So, but for example, if you get an ENTJ in socionics or ESTJ in socionics, they don't necessarily strike me as the most overtly sociable people at all. Bill Gates, LIE, Ben Shapiro, LIE, they might be talking about people, but that doesn't mean that they're sociable and just kind of lively and warm. And I just think that's a conflation. So, um, but I get what people are trying to communicate, so I don't try to be a stickler. But yeah, not any significant changes. And I also don't feel like I absolutize personality. I think personality is a feature of human beings, but is not the ultimate descriptor and way of understanding people. I kind of think of personality, and I've said this for a decent amount of time, is just kind of they're features of reality that are true in virtue of things just existing. In terms of extroverted sensation, for example, there are things in the world that, because they have a greater mass, they take up more space necessarily than something of a smaller mass, and that's basically an illustration of extroverted sensation. And they move outwardly, extroverted sensation. That is just a feature of the created world, and because of that, human beings also being a part of the created world and being conscious agents, which is distinct from a planet and other uh, uh, what's the word inanimate objects, most embodies and illustrates those information elements in themselves. Because once you apply information elements with consciousness, then you have an animation of that information. It's the information put on display. Then you get extroverted ethics, right? It's kind of a has an emotive quality to it, that it's moving outward and basically transferring moods and energy outwardly. Um, and so I look at I say that to say I look at personality as fundamentally more about information uh, as such and how it relates to human beings. That's virtually how I understand personality. Um, and with that, it allows for specificity of how people actually operate and how that's different from other people, and without the danger of absolutizing personality and making personality the chief essence of what it means to be a human being, because I don't believe that. So it's it's actually kind of an extroverted logic way of understanding people, in the sense of how do you operate based upon this kind of information that you possess in a hierarchical fashion, that's clearly separated and compartmentalized, also still has some way of relating with each other because it is also a dynamic, in order to determine behavior. I just find that fascinating. I don't even really use it. Uh, I use it practically to an extent, but it's more of a communicative use and problem solving too. Um, but I'm not overly productive with like making money off of it or seeking to, because that, to me, I feel like it takes the fun out of it. It's like I could do that, and I have done some stuff like that with the Enneagram, but also you just realize people don't really care. You can really draft up a really detailed argument for their type of whatever you type them, and it just bounces off. They just refuse to accept it. Some people, not all people, but and so once you have that happen many times, you're like, okay, you have a need that I can't meet, and so I'm no longer of use to you, and so you need to. There's a different solution to this problem. Now the problem is not what I thought it was. I thought the problem was, where do you fit in this box and how do I defend that claim? Once I did that, and I think successfully with certain people sometimes, then I gave it to you and you're just resistant. And so now the problem is no longer what box are you in. The problem is, um, why can't you accept that? Slash, you know what I'm saying? It just, and I'm not a therapist, counselor. So it's like, okay, now, man, as a Christian, it's like, okay, brother, we need to, you know, yeah, it's more likely that people just pose, yeah, yeah. And I think that's very common, and that's just the function of the ego in many ways. And it's just, and more types are more likely to do that than others. That's also an interesting thing. And I also think people in general function that way. A lot of people just, um, I think it's a kind of psychological process that is occurring when that's present, and it has some issue with identity at some level. Um, and so, yeah, that's a very prominent. And even like when people take tests on, I never like, even for myself, like if I'm taking a test online, this is only going to be somewhat consistent based upon whether or not A, I'm self-aware enough to be consistent in my answers, and B, um, that I'm not consciously trying to hijack, or not even consciously, unconsciously, just because your ego gets involved, and hijack the test in order to get the type that I want. So it's like if those two elements are always present, mostly, like that's a very consistent theme when anyone's taking a test. Um, Most people are not self-aware, and most people are not um, critical of themselves enough to answer accurately. And so when someone says I took a test this many times, it's like, that what's possible here is you really, that could just be saying you really want to be that type. Nothing about you taking the test over and over and over again is a strong argument in favor of the type that you received. I can think of three other possible implications of that don't have to be. This is Yeah, one of them is you might be that type. I'm not you know, denying that, but uh, it takes far more um, scientific kind of analysis where you're also testing the test itself. Like, is this even a good test, objectively speaking? Like, are these questions posed in a certain way that lead the witness to a certain decision? Like, not all tests are equally uh, fair, and not all tests are good tests. And so, um, you would almost want to test the validity of the way the test was created itself, and then you have to deal with testing yourself. Um, and so that's a long process. That's a process of having feedback from people around you who can provide objective uh, as much as you can. It's still subjective because they have a subjective relationship to you, but whatever. Um, but feedback where they can mirror what you claim of yourself and what you do, and kind of try to rectify that difference, if there is a difference. Um, and so basically the principle of understanding your personality is to be in community in some fashion, and um, also it's that relationship between the external world and the internal world. If you're so internal, you don't have anything mirroring back to you saying, "Hey, this is off and that's off." If it's too external, then you don't have a way of mediating what you're doing with why it's important, or what you're doing and why it has personal significance to you in any way. So it's kind of both things happening. And ideally, I don't think, yeah, this is just like a splitting effect psychologically, where we just think in either or scenarios. And in some fashion, in some context, that obviously applies. Logic obviously exists, and something's either true or it's not. Um, but with things like, even when I was talking about, well, when I was talking about, I'm kind of losing my train of thought. This would be evidence of PE in any context, right? Probably. But um, why did I don't even, I don't know where I'm going with this. Nowhere in particular. But yeah, it's not just like I'm going to take a bunch of tests, never ask anybody else or engage with the community at all. It's like, yeah, you're deluded then. You just necessarily. Um, and then you're always with people, and then you can't see the distinction between you and someone else because you're always with them. And then so you're like, what's significant about me? How does my own personality work? And you can't rectify that because you haven't internalized anything. You're just out there like a plastic bag drifting through the wind, as a profound poet once said. So, um, uh, dude, I can't get this open. So, yeah, dude, my train of thought's gone. There we go. So long story short, I still find personality fascinating, and I don't really think that's going to leave per se. I'm always kind of moving into different domains of intrigue, and kind of building this. Out of all languages you heard, what's the best sounding? All languages I've heard, best sounding. I have no idea. I don't even think I have. I don't know. Maybe. I actually can't answer. I don't know. Spanish, I guess. I don't know. I haven't heard that many different languages, to be honest. So I can't really give maybe French. I know everyone says that one's one of the best. So Um, for me, it's Romanian. Yeah, I've never heard Romanian, to be quite honest.
I believe you.
Dude, that glare is rough, isn't it? I should probably use my. Let's see if I do this. It's not really helping, is it? Sorry for the glare. Yeah, I'm just gonna turn it here. Oh, who am I to deny what the Lord can do? You are more than able. And the light's still there, dude. Come on, brother. Whatever. Actually, let me go. But yeah, and also people just get tired of hearing about personality theory, to be quite honest. Like in my actual life, they're like, bro, I've tapered off a lot. I've tried to I just moved. Oh my gosh. This is that's a lot better. Do you still smoke? I do not. I do nicotine packs, which have been great because I was pretty 18 milligram. Dude, that would fry your brain. Are you doing 18 milligram? That's rough. I didn't even know they made 18. No, I don't do that. I do 9, which is a lot, I thought. I guess it's not. 18. My brain would shut off. 4 milligram ground. You said 8. Who's doing 18? Who's doing that? They do 50. No, dude. Dude, 9 sometimes, like, it feels like your brain's like 50 would give you brain damage. Like, but no, the Nick packs I love them. Haven't smoked a black and mild in probably 5 months, something like that. I smoke cigars because it's a cigar. But yeah, I have asthma, so smoking was not ever a good idea to begin with. And then again, a lot of people who smoke have you just don't think that. You wouldn't think that, but it's a lot more common than people think. They have asthma who smoke, basically. But no, yeah, I just do the nicotine packs. Kind of get your brain going. It's also really nice to read with them in. I've noticed that. Like it really kind of keeps you focused a little bit, kind of sharp. But yeah, so yeah, people get tired of the what type are you? What so now I just basically cloak my language, cloak the socionics language. I don't even talk about Enneagram really anymore, but socionics specifically, and personality in the general sense. I kind of cloak that language, socionics language, with like talking about temperament and talking about the information elements in a way people can conceptualize without having the taxonomy, the language of the taxonomy. And then people are like, oh, that's interesting. Where does that distinction come from? And then you just kind of basically introduce more information elemental dichotomies, namely, extrovert logic, extroversion, dynamic logic, all that kind of stuff. And admittedly, I haven't gone back to look at socionics in a like a research sense, but yeah, and it's helpful. I've been able to have more productive and clear communication with people to where I can express what I'm thinking in a way that they're capable of. And this is not an intelligence issue. It very rarely is an intelligence gap. And maybe I'm a little bit optimistic about people's intelligence in the sense that, yes, are there dumb people in the world? Yeah, it's unfortunate. There are people who have very low IQs, and that's just a genetic, um, unfortunate case. But most people, I've learned, have a very particular. I mean, people are complex, but they have a very particular taxonomy they're using to express their thoughts and you know opinions. And consensus feels great. Consensus is, even if consensus is we don't agree, if you understand that where I'm coming from and how I'm arguing for what I'm arguing for, and conversely, I understand where you're coming from, and we don't agree. We know definitively that both of our positions are antithetical, and that's fine. No problem. Some ideas are stupid and should be rejected. That's just a fact. Um, you kept telling me I liked your one. No, he actually reached out to me. We're in different time zones, but he reached out to me like at 2 a.m. and obviously I was sleeping. So he said he wanted me to get back on, or one of his subscribers or commenters, whatever, asked about me. But yeah, we might do something. It's just hard to link up. We're also both very scattered, not very conscientious. That's one thing that we're both pretty similar. I'm sure the big five were actually pretty similar, but so it's hard to schedule out a time that would work, and we're not schedule oriented people. I'm sure he would say that about himself too. So we just very much kind of go with the flow. But oh, it might have been you. Might have been you. Yeah. We'll have to figure something out. But he's like a big bro. Like he just has a very like big brother, like I don't know, energy, whatever. But and it's just yeah, we just talk about the most random stuff. But I know he's on his like political. He has very interesting opinions. We've talked offline too about different stuff. So we might have to. His group talks to. They are very. I've tuned into some of them, not for very long, but it's just interesting, like the different kind of people he has on there and the conversations they're having. But yeah, we might. I've done this for 42 minutes. That's crazy. Um, but I might. Yeah, I might reach out to him and we'll try to maybe get some going. But he's a funny guy. Flow state. Yeah, during his live. But man, I hate. Gotta go. I'm turning notifications on. Oh, nice, man. I appreciate it. No problem. Have a good rest of the day, bro. It's good talking. It's good talking. But yeah, your next stream, nice. Yeah, I should start doing this more. I really just got to think about content because I've taken a different direction in general. But yeah, I mean, just coming on live and talking. Yeah, no problem, man. Thanks for listening. Yeah, so generally, you can try nootropic reviews. Yeah, maybe that's an interesting idea. Legit works. All right, gotta see you. Peace, my brother. Yeah, I kind of thought about doing reviews here and there, but I definitely need to branch out a little bit more. I have and the funny thing is, I have many areas I could go, but it's also just about sitting down and actually planning stuff that I'm like, ugh. Low conscientiousness feels bad. And then when I do it, it never goes the way I want to. I'm just better free flowing. Thanks for the like, man. But yeah, so, but yeah, at a certain point, you got to move on to different stuff. Like people, and it's easy to get in the trap of like talking about one particular thing. But it's like eventually you're like, all right, this is how do I spread the reach of personality theory to get into different domains. That's really the most enjoyable part because there's so many things that you can be learning and having potential conversations with other people about. But if you limit yourself to one subject or topic, one, you can't talk to as many people, and you can't, and also just cognitively, you're just kind of narrow-minded and just in the sense of you can only really speak about one thing, and that to me is just not fun. It's like, why would I want to do that? So yeah, um, yeah. What else can I talk about though? But yeah, that freedom of the will book though. Yeah, for those that are not super familiar with that conversation and who Jonathan Edwards was, he's just a very different mind, and um, his books are they're the hardest reads. Period. There's nothing else that has come close to it. The amount of mental energy it takes to dissect one paragraph of what Jonathan Edwards said, and you can read it and you're like, I feel like this is profound, but I don't understand it. And so usually with reads like that, it's helped me to kind of just take paragraph by paragraph, sentence by sentence, reading it out loud, and just trying to get in the ballpark of what he's trying to argue. But yeah, the last thing I was reading, and this is off the top of the dome, was about was divine foreknowledge and how it really doesn't escape determinism. Um, and yeah, it's a very complicated um, thing to conceptualize. Um, but yeah, I might wait to see if anybody else is. Um, but yeah, I just find that the idea of determinism and free will very fascinating um, dilemma in a sense, and trying to figure out how to rectify both of them. Um, yeah, I am literally yapping about nothing right now. This is the extra version I play. Is there anyone joining here? Um, but yeah, it's very interesting. We got one person in here. What's up? There was someone else on here, and I was yapping, and then they left. So now I'm just trying to yap my way um, into another domain. But yeah, uh, yeah, Jonathan Edwards, Freedom of the Will, highly recommend for people who are interested in the topic of determinism and free will. It's just fascinating, and it's just like a philosophical, long-standing debate for a long time, and it's just interesting. Like, in what sense? Dang it! I thought I locked somebody in, and they said, "Nah, bruh." All right, well, I think I might get off of here. There's not really much steam rolling, so all right, see ya.